So for those of you who may be just arriving here at the Climate Scale-Up event, welcome. My name is Jason Jay. I'm a senior lecturer at the MIT Sloan School of Management, director of our sustainability initiative, and contributing to the launch of the MIT Climate Project, where part of our thinking is about how to decarbonize energy and industry. And as we're doing that, we look ahead to what are the big growth areas for human emissions, right? You can look at the flows of carbon emissions globally right now and say, well, obviously we've got to decarbonize cement and steel and electricity and ammonia, and we're talking about all of that today. But as we look forward about where that Sankey diagram is going to look right in 10, 15 years, and even right now as we speak, it's the growth of data, and many of you have certainly heard about that. So when we think about this intersection between tech and climate, we're sort of at the perfect nexus here. I've noticed at Davos this week, everything seems to either be AI or climate. And so, like Jen Turlick.
I observed the same thing.
Yeah, you observed the same thing. So here we get to actually talk about both. But we're going to start by just situating this within the larger sustainability vision for Google.
Yeah.
So Kate, could you just lay a picture for that of how does Google think about its role in this bigger future?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me, Jason, and great to be here with you all in this unbelievably gorgeous venue. Super awe-inspiring to be up here. Yes, so our program at Google on sustainability has really been with us since our founding 25 years ago and is truly embedded in our business being an information and an innovation company. And so as we look at the work, we kind of think about it in two dimensions, and we were just talking about this. The first is how our products can enable governments, businesses, other organizations, and individuals to achieve their sustainability objectives. And so we set out a very bold aspiration for ourselves several years ago, which is that we want to enable a gigaton of reductions of emissions by 2030 and annually after that. So that's like the emissions of Japan. So we've built a very large product portfolio, and we'll get into some examples of that, I'm sure, in this conversation, that's oriented around enabling that kind of impact. And then also as an information company, as you know very well, we have many products that billions of people use every day. You probably have used them one time today already. But we have really looked at ways to bring the most helpful sustainability information into Google Search, things like making the EV buying experience the best it can be with range calculators and the ability to calculate incentives and much more. And we look at that in terms of how do we enable 1 billion sustainable actions every year, and we've done that for the last 2 years in a row. So that's kind of at a high level how we think about the product side of our work. And then, of course, it's very important that we lead by example in how we operate our business, and I know we'll get more into talking about the environmental footprint of AI in this conversation. But we've set also an ambitious goal by 2030 there for ourselves, which is that we want to be net zero. And for us, what that means is reducing our emissions 50% from a 2019 baseline, and then managing the residual emissions with carbon removals, both nature-based and technology-based. So we definitely have our work cut out for us. We're at halftime of this decisive decade. And all of this is about partnership. Our whole ethos is this is about how do we support you all, how do we engage in the ecosystem, how do we be early adopters and enablers. So that's how we think about it.
Awesome. One thing we were noticing, we had a friend in common when you're talking about the handprint of Google, right, and the use of the products. My student, Ruben Lozada, went to go work for Google and helped the Google Maps have green routing to get people to take the most energy efficient routes on the map. So that's an example of kind of this enabling billion
exactly,
actions.
And enabled by AI. So yes, eco-friendly routing in Google Maps. Hopefully you've seen this. That's the little green leaf that you get. That's showing you the most fuel-efficient route if it isn't already the fastest one, powered by AI computation in the background, looking at all different factors, the gradient of roads, traffic, and other factors. And since we brought this feature to market about 18 months ago, and we've continued to roll it out to new geos, it's already enabled our users to avoid 2.9 million metric tons of CO2e, about the equivalent of taking 650,000 fuel-based cars off the road. So just that one solution is really showing us what's possible for AI-enabled emissions reductions.
Awesome. And bringing MIT and Google people together.
Exactly.
So let's talk about the footprint side of it for a little while. So in order to achieve a net zero objective, you said you want to do a 50% reduction in your emissions. And so a lot of those emissions are going to be electricity based. You're running computers of various different kinds. So how do you do that?
Yes. So we have been really focused on how do we mobilize more clean energy, both for our operations, but really in service of broader systems change, broader grid decarbonization. So we started this work actually back in 2010. We signed our first power purchase agreement in 2010. Then fast forward to 2017, we, for the first year in a row, matched 100% of our electricity use with renewable energy. But as we continued forward with the program, we said to ourselves, that's actually not how we're going to get to the deepest grid decarbonization. We need to do better. We need to, on an hourly basis, be consuming 24/7 carbon-free energy. So in 2020, we set a goal for ourselves that by 2030, we want to operate all of our offices and data center campuses on 24/7 carbon-free energy. Now, as you can imagine, that's quite challenging. We're 64% of the way there. In several geographies, we've already gotten to 90%. And for us, that's going to be a big portfolio play. We already have a huge portfolio of wind and solar. We have about 14 gigawatts, 115 agreements. That's about a $16 billion commitment by 2040. But it's also really important that we continue to bring in other clean, firm solutions as well. And so we've been focused, for example, on advanced nuclear. And you may have seen an announcement we made a few weeks ago with Kairos Power that we've committed to a 500 megawatt order book of SMR purchases that we hope will start coming online in 2030 and afterwards. We've also been looking at advanced geothermal, such a powerful solution, and we already have a partnership with Fervo that's powering our data center in Nevada with advanced geothermal. So a lot of opportunities there in terms of continuing to really innovate in a suite of solutions around clean, firm power. And then also in the ecosystem you need, so some of us have been talking about book and claim for things like low carbon concrete and other attributes. We've also been really focused on creating time-based energy attribution certificates or granular certificates, which is going to be really critical to this 24/7 acceleration.
I've been watching Google kind of move up the ladder in terms of the seriousness of that energy matching, right?
Yeah.
Going from global to regional, going from annual to daily to hourly, and so this, but we want to give you credit for that, right? And so this idea of the certificates, that's to kind of make it clear that you're actually getting that hourly matching.
Exactly.
And that others who might be claiming Scope 2 emissions reductions may not have that same degree of rigor.
Right. Well, it's basically to say, we have regular energy attribution certificates that show you that megawatt, right, a REC or a guarantee of origin. But what we don't have is the time-based element. So we've been working with partners like Level 10 to actually set up marketplaces where you can trade time-based energy attribution certificates. And we see that as really critical to scaling the project of 24/7 carbon-free energy, because one of the fair critiques we often get is, well, that's great, you're Google, you can do it, but this is hard. And we're saying, well, once you have an attribute that can be traded, then you can open up that market to many more players. And so that's going to be really critical.
You just mentioned embodied emissions, right? And sort of the Scope 3, right? So the electricity is in Scope 2. Or if we're thinking about the Scope 3, what do you see as some of the challenges there, and what steps are you guys taking to deal with that? The construction materials, the IT, all the sort of embodied aspect.
Yeah. So when we look at our footprint, the composition of our footprint is 25% operational emissions, 75% Scope 3. And of that entire carbon footprint, really the answer to decarbonization for us, for 75%, is going to be clean power, both for our operations and also in our value chain. So then that other 25% is a lot of what we're looking at in terms of things like the embodied emissions in data centers, in our offices, and some other areas as well. But we've been looking at that through a variety of lenses. One is we like to do adaptive reuse as much as possible. So we have really great examples of where we've taken sites that were used for something else. Like in Hamina, Finland, we took an old paper mill and turned it into a data center and used the seawater cooling infrastructure to be the cooling system for the data center. Or in Widows Creek in Alabama in the US, we built a data center on the site of a retired Tennessee Valley Authority coal plant. We were able to take advantage of a lot of the infrastructure that was already there. So that's one way to really reduce those embodied emissions, is starting with existing infrastructure. We were talking about this before the panel. We've also, for many years, like over a decade, I've been really looking at how can we take a more circular approach to the management of our data center hardware. And so there we're using component parts from servers to do, quick fixes of servers that are on the floor. And then also, once the machines have ended their useful life, we can wipe the components clean and we sell them on secondary markets. So that's another great solution we've utilized. And then also low carbon concrete. I know we were talking about that before the panel. That's another important solution for us. Data centers obviously use a lot of concrete. We're part of an initiative through iMasons that's bringing data center operators together to accelerate adoption there. And then on the real estate side too, we've been very focused on mass timber as a great solution. So we recently rebuilt the headquarters for YouTube and did a massive mass timber installation, and that reduced the footprint of the building materials by about 50%. And then the last example I would give is also in our consumer hardware devices, actually. You might have a Pixel phone in your pocket. The aluminum enclosure for the Pixel phone is 100% recycled content aluminum.
Yeah.
And so that reduced the footprint by about 35%.
Yeah, I know that was a big win for Apple when they went to the recycled aluminum as well. It turns out to be one of those hidden things you don't think about.
Totally.
Super interesting. Okay, so now let's come back to the big elephant in the room, right? AI. So AI has a handprint and a footprint, right? As we were talking about before about Google can enable good things with AI, and many of us have seen graphs of your emissions sort of reversing directions and increasing with use of AI. So let's talk about the handprint first, and then we'll get to the footprint about how do we tackle this massive increase in demand, and what can we achieve with it?
Yeah. Handprint first?
Handprint first.
Okay. So I am a huge believer in the opportunity that AI holds to accelerate climate action. And you may have seen a study that we published alongside BCG a little over a year ago that said there's roughly a 5 to 10% additional emissions reduction that could be enabled by AI by 2030. So this decisive decade, which is the real focus for us in many ways. And that's the equivalent to the economy of Japan in terms of emissions. So that's a huge opportunity space. And we have really seen that AI has three big superpowers when it comes to climate action. The first is around information, and that's tools exactly like eco-friendly routing, like what our friend Ruben has been doing, which we already discussed. Another is optimization. AI is really, really excellent at optimizing complex systems. And so one project that we've done in that space through our Google research team is something called Project Greenlight. And so in this initiative, we've been working with city traffic engineers to better sequence traffic lights in cities. And so what that does is it gives you more of that green wave effect, which I love when I'm late to leave the office to get home for dinner with my daughter. But also it reduces starting and stopping events by 30% and emissions by 10%. And that's actually extremely important because emissions are 69 times higher when you're idling at an intersection rather than being on the open road. So this is a really powerful tool. It's already available in 13 cities. We're going to continue expanding it. It's a great example of optimization. And then the last area I would point to is around prediction. AI is extremely powerful when it comes to weather prediction. We have new weather models that are able to do the best 15-day in advance weather prediction that's out there. And we've also been really focused on how do we better predict natural disasters. So for example, flooding. Our Google research team built the very first global hydrologic model that enables us to model riverine flooding and then to provide alerts to communities 7 days in advance of flooding, which is really powerful for getting people out of harm's way. And then similarly, we've been doing a lot of work around fires. I know that's on a lot of our minds with LA. I live in California. I know a lot of people probably have friends and family affected by the fires in LA. We've teamed up with the Moore Foundation to launch something called FireSat, which is a constellation of satellites that can do 20-minute increment updates to catch wildfires really early after ignition when they're just about a 5x5 size, so even smaller than this room, and using AI with the satellite imagery to be able to do that. So lots of really powerful areas there too.
Yeah, that's key. My friends who were evacuated were just starved for accurate real-time information.
Yeah,
So
and we're also doing wildfire boundaries in Google Maps, which have been
Right,
really
I've
powerful for
seen that.
people who are trying to evacuate, also doing real-time updates there. So that's also AI-powered and a really great tool.
So now let's talk about the footprint side.
Yep.
So the ramp up of this computation in all forms, right? LLMs to this type of optimization, growth of compute. How do we think about that energy demand? and how to meet it in a low carbon way?
Yeah. So it's a very important topic. I think one there's been a lot of discourse around recently, rightfully so. And maybe just to create a little bit of context, because I find there's some good information out there on this topic. There's, some maybe not so great information. So when you think about the digital economy, it contributes about 10 to 15% to global GDP. And today, data centers use about 1 to 1.3% of electricity. That's according to the IEA. So if you think about it, that's a pretty efficient use of that electricity for that amount of economic output. So I think just kind of good to level set there. And we are seeing load growth. We've seen predictions also from the IEA that by 2050, overall electricity demand is going to grow by 2.5x. That's due to a lot of factors, though, as you all know in this room, I'm sure, right? That's electrification of buildings, of vehicles, it's growth in manufacturing. Sadly, it's increase in needing for cooling. That's a huge driver because of climate change, because temperatures are increasing. So that's sort of just like the facts of the matter. Then as we think about it, we see 3 really powerful ways that we can continue to really reduce the footprint of AI. The first one is around really efficient training of models. And so we have published research and will continue to share more best practices, but of approaches that we've used that have already enabled us to reduce the electricity required by 100x, the emissions by 1,000x. We've secondarily been really focused on how do we build the most efficient data centers possible. And so, we are just actually touching on some of those factors, but it's all the way to how you build the whole system, how you make the cooling as efficient as possible. So today we're getting 4 times more compute for the same amount of electricity as compared to 5 years ago. It's down to the chip. With each generation, we're seeing huge advances in chip efficiency. For us, 67% increase in efficiency between our last 2 generations of TPUs. And then it's 24/7 carbon-free energy. It's powering our operations and then looking at some of those embodied emissions as well. So you really have to tackle it from all angles. But I'm confident, truly, based on what I'm seeing, that we can continue to drive down those emissions and that all of these really powerful use cases are going to far outweigh that footprint. I mean, if you think about that gigaton aspiration I shared with you, that's equivalent to the emissions of the economy of Japan. Our total footprint, not just for AI, for all of Google, is 1 coal plant.
Interesting. The theme of today is about the innovation ecosystem, right? How do you work with startups around this whole context? Google is an extremely innovative company, bucks a lot of the trends of what we expect large companies to be able to do, and at the same time, a lot of the great products in Google that we know were acquisitions of startups.
Yeah.
So how do you participate in the climate space specifically? Mm-hmm. How do you participate in the entrepreneurial ecosystem?
Yeah, in a variety of ways. I think it's absolutely critical that we have a really robust ecosystem, and I really enjoyed getting to talk to some of you out here in the room before we came in here about all the innovations that you're driving. So we look at this through a few lenses. One is we have a program called Google for Startups Accelerator, and so we run these accelerators that are a 10-week program, equity-free, that are focused on different aspects of sustainability. We've done ones around climate, we've done ones around circularity, we've had a regional focus. So these are really powerful for supporting the startup ecosystem and for having an exchange of ideas where we can share, what would it take for us to be a customer? How are we thinking about deploying AI within business models to, make them more effective? So that's a great program. We also are very involved philanthropically in the climate ecosystem. So our foundation, google.org, has given $1.2 billion to climate-oriented nonprofits, again, to drive innovation, a lot of it enabled by AI. And then lastly, we're really passionate about getting startups on Google Cloud. So we have a program called Google Cloud Ready, where we can, make arrangements with startups to get them on Google Cloud, and then we have a marketplace where you can cross-sell with us, and we can really lift up what are those climate and sustainability solutions that are in that marketplace that are built on Google Cloud.
Super cool. The last question is about leading by example. I think Google is, one of the companies that we all look to for kind of as being involved in a race to the top, mm-hmm. right? When so many companies are engaged in a race to the bottom. What advice do you have for folks who are in the business world to help keep that momentum going, to build the momentum and to keep it going?
Yeah. I mean, I think one really important thing is both to really understand your impact, right? Understand the hot spots within your business. We've talked about much of ours, and really go after those and really address those vigorously. And then also, kind of conversely, like know your superpowers. You know, as I said, like we really think about this as an information and an innovation company, and how we unlock our platforms to build solutions. So I think that's really important too. Like as a business, what can be your sustainability superpowers? How do you actually gain profit from addressing these issues? I would also say, you know, stay the course, right? I think that's a big conversation that's already happening, that's going to continue happening through the course of this year. I'm a really big proponent of setting time-bound goals and using them to innovate. You know, we like to say at Google, we like hard problems, and I sometimes have conversations internally where people are like, oh God, Kate, I don't know, this seems really hard. And I'm like, that's the point, it should be hard. And we should also embrace companies for, you don't have to get 100% of the way there. You don't need to get an A+. You need to keep going. You need to keep innovating and making progress, and also sharing your mistakes. I think that's such an important thing in the ecosystem, to talk about what works and what doesn't work.
Yes.
And then the last thing I would say is collaboration. Like that is just the name of the game for me. It's all about how do we do this together. That's how we're going to drive the systems change. No one company, not even a company as large as Google, can do it on our own.
Yeah. Well, to that end, I appreciate you being here and engaging with all of us. Hope to see more of you around MIT and in these startup communities. And thank you so much, Kate.
Yeah,
Appreciate
thank you. Really appreciate it.
Okay, so our next panel is about green leapfrogging. So as we